The rain over Chicago didn't fall. It hammered. It was a relentless, icy sheet of gray that turned the Dan Ryan Expressway into a blur of taillights and misery, the kind of weather that felt less like a meteorological event and more like a divine judgment on the city. Elias Thorne sat in the driver's seat of his aging Ford sedan, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. The rhythmic thwack hiss of the windshield wipers was the only sound competing with the chaotic drumbeat of the storm on the metal roof. He checked the digital clock on the dashboard. 10:45 p.m. He was late. Elias hated being late. In 30 years of coaching football, from the muddy high school fields of Ohio to the pristine, heated turf of Soldier Field, he had operated on a military standard of punctuality. To be early was to be on time. To be on time was to be late. To be late was unacceptable. But the summons had come unexpectedly, a text message from Marcus Sterling's personal assistant that read more like a subpoena than an invitation. Penthouse, 11 p.m.
Urgent.
Come alone. Elias rubbed his eyes. They were gritty with fatigue. The playoffs had been a brutal gauntlet, a physical and emotional meat grinder that had left his roster battered and his own mind fraying at the edges. But they had done it. The Chicago Titans were going to the Super Bowl. The city was in a state of hysteria, painting their faces blue and silver, while Elias felt nothing but a hollow, vibrating anxiety. He pulled up to the curb of the Sterling Spire, a monolith of glass and steel that pierced the low-hanging clouds. It was a building that looked down on the rest of the city, quite literally much like its owner. Valets in waterproof capes swarmed the car before he even put it in park, but Elias waved them off. He grabbed his heavy wool trench coat from the passenger seat, ignoring the umbrella the doorman offered, and strode into the lobby. The transition was jarring. The howling wind was instantly replaced by the hushed, sterile hum of filtered air and the scent of white tea and expensive leather. The lobby was empty save for a single security guard who nodded at him with recognition, though not warmth. Elias marched to the private elevator, the one that required a retinal scan. He leaned in, the red laser tracing his weary iris, and the doors slid open with a whisper. As the elevator ascended, climbing 50, 60, 70 floors, Elias's ears popped. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out his phone. He had been dictating notes for the offensive line schemes on the drive over, a habit he couldn't break. He tapped the screen, intending to stop the voice memo app, but the elevator lurched slightly as it hit the wind shear near the top of the building. His thumb missed the stop button. He didn't notice. He just slid the phone back into the breast pocket of his heavy coat, the red recording timer still ticking away silently against his chest. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse. The room was cavernous, a temple to modern excess. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Chicago, though tonight the city was just a smear of wet light through the rain. A fire crackled in a hearth large enough to roast an ox, but it gave off no warmth, or perhaps Elias was just chilled to the bone. "Elias, you look like a drowned rat." Marcus Sterling stood by the fireplace, swirling a tumbler of amber liquid. He was a man who wore suits that cost more than Elias's first house, a man whose smile never quite reached his predatory, shark-like eyes. At 60, Sterling looked 40, preserved by money and the blood of his enemies. "Traffic was hell, Marcus," Elias said, his voice raspy. He didn't take off his coat. He felt the need for armor. "What's this about?" "I have film to review. The defense packages for Miami aren't going to design themselves." "Always working," Sterling mused, walking over to a crystal decanter. "That's what I like about you, Elias. You're a grinder, a blue-collar hero for a blue-collar town. Drink?" "No. I want to know why I'm here 3 days before the team flies out." "Relax. It's a celebration. We're the kings of the North, aren't we?" Sterling gestured toward the shadows of the massive living area, where a sectional sofa wrapped around a low marble table. "And I'm not the only one who wanted to talk strategy." Elias squinted into the dim light. A figure shifted on the sofa, rising slowly. It was Jax Miller, the Titans quarterback, the golden boy, the kid Elias had scouted from a no-name college in Oklahoma, the kid he had defended when the press called him too small, too reckless. Hijacks was wearing a hoodie and ripped jeans, looking every bit the 24-year-old superstar, but his eyes were darting around the room, avoiding Elias's gaze. "Hijacks?" Elias frowned, stepping further into the room. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be on curfew. If the press catches you out this late." "I invited him, Elias." Sterling cut in smoothly, handing a glass of whiskey to Hijacks, who took it with a trembling hand. "Sit down, please." Elias didn't sit. He stood in the center of the Persian rug, water dripping from the hem of his coat onto the intricate silk patterns. "I'll stand. Talk." Sterling took a sip of his drink, savoring it. "You know, Elias, football is a romantic game. The gridiron, the glory, the battle. But at the end of the day, it's an industry. It's a line on a spreadsheet. I don't need a business lecture, Marcus. I need to know why my starting quarterback is drinking scotch at midnight instead of sleeping." "The spread," Sterling said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming serious. "Let's talk about the spread." Elias stared at him. "The betting line? You dragged me here to talk about Vegas?" "The line opened with us as 7-point favorites," Sterling continued, ignoring Elias's incredulity. "But in the last 48 hours, a lot of money, smart money, has moved. The line is shifting. People expect a blowout, Elias. They expect the Titans to crush Miami. And we will," Elias said firmly. "We're the better team." "That's the problem," Sterling said. He set his glass down on the marble table with a sharp clack. "If we cover that spread, if we win by 10, 14, 20 points, certain associates of mine are going to be very, very unhappy. We're talking about exposure in the 9 figures, Elias. Catastrophic losses." The air in the room seemed to vanish. Elias felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He looked from Sterling to Hijacks. The kid was staring at his sneakers, swirling the ice in his glass. "What are you saying?" Elias asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I'm saying we need to manage expectations," Sterling said, walking around the sofa to stand behind Hijacks, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder. "We need to win. The championship is non-negotiable. I want that trophy. But the margin needs to be thin, razor thin." Elias felt the blood rushing in his ears. "You want me to shave points?" "I want you to be smart," Sterling corrected. "A conservative play call in the red zone. A field goal instead of a touchdown. Maybe a soft zone defense in the 4th quarter to let them garner some garbage time points. The score needs to be within 3. Ideally 24-21, or 20-17. Elias let out a short, incredulous laugh. It was a dry, bitter sound. "You're insane. You're asking me to fix the Super Bowl. I'm asking you to protect the organization," Sterling snapped, his veneer of politeness cracking. "This team runs on capital, Elias, and the people providing that capital need this result. The simple math." Elias turned to Hijacks. "And you're listening to this garbage?" Hijacks finally looked up. His eyes were wet, glassy. "Coach, listen. It's not about losing. We still win the ring. We still get the parade. We just have to keep it close." "Keep it close." Elias stepped forward, and Hijacks flinched. "Do you have any idea what you're saying? You're the quarterback. You control the game. If you start throwing balls into the dirt on purpose, if you start checking down when you have the deep shot, you're spitting on every guy in that locker room who bleeds for you. It's $50 million, coach," Hijacks whispered, his voice cracking. $50 million, tax-free, offshore, for one game where we still win." Elias felt like he had been punched in the gut. The betrayal wasn't just professional. It was personal. He had treated Hijacks like a son. He had invited this kid to Thanksgiving dinner. He had held him when he cried after his mother died. "I don't care about the money," Elias said, spitting the words out. "I don't care about your gambling debts, Marcus, or your associates. I coach to win. I coach to dominate. If we're up by 30, I'm going for 40. Sterling moved away from the sofa, his face hardening into a mask of stone. That wasn't a request, Elias. It was an instruction. Then you hired the wrong man. Elias turned his back on them, heading for the elevator. I'm going to pretend this conversation didn't happen, for the sake of the team. But if I see anything funny on Sunday, I'm pulling you, Jax. I'll put in the backup and I'll tell the press exactly why. Stop, Sterling commanded. The word echoed off the glass walls. Elias stopped, his hand hovering over the elevator call button. He turned around. Sterling was leaning against his desk now, looking bored. You're not listening, Elias. You don't have a choice. This is happening. With or without you. Then it's without me, Elias said. I quit. No, Sterling es Mirkev. You don't get to quit. You don't get to ride off into the sunset as the martyr. You're fired. Fine. Fire me. See how the city reacts 3 days before the game. Oh, they won't react well, Sterling agreed. But they won't blame me. You see, I have a file, Elias. Statements from the cheerleading squad about inappropriate comments. Statements from the training staff about your erratic behavior and prescription pill abuse. Is it true? Doesn't matter. By the time the lawyers figure it out, your career will be a smoking crater. You'll never coach a peewee team again, let alone in the NFL. Elias stared at the man. He saw the depth of the corruption, the rot that was hidden beneath the expensive suit. He looked at Jax, hoping for a spark of defiance, a shred of the courage he showed in the pocket. But Jax just took a long swallow of whiskey, looking away. The kid was bought and paid for. You're a monster, Marcus, Elias said, his voice trembling with rage. And you, he looked at Jax. You're nothing. You're just an arm with a price tag. Get out of my building, Sterling said coldly. Security will escort you. Don't go to the facility. Your badge has already been deactivated. Elias turned and slammed his hand against the elevator button. The doors opened immediately. He stepped inside, refusing to look back at the luxury prison he was leaving behind. The doors slid shut, sealing off the sight of the 2 men who had just murdered the sport he loved. As the elevator began its long descent, the adrenaline that had sustained Elias during the confrontation began to drain away, replaced by a crushing weight of despair. He slumped against the mirrored wall of the elevator car. He was finished. 30 years of blood and sweat, erased in a 10-minute conversation. He was going to be smeared, destroyed, and cast aside. He watched the floor numbers tick down. The heat in the elevator felt stifling. He loosened his scarf. He unbuttoned the top of his heavy wool coat. As he did, his hand brushed against the inside pocket. He felt the phone. A jolt of electricity ran through him. He pulled it out. The screen was dim but active. The voice memo app was still open. The red waveform was still scrolling across the screen, visualizing the silence of the elevator. Recording. Elias stared at the numbers. His breath hitched in his throat. He had started the recording in the car. He had walked through the lobby. He had ridden the elevator up. And he had stood in that room. Trembling, he pressed stop. He scrolled back on the timeline. He put the phone to his ear, his hand shaking so hard he nearly dropped the device. He scrubbed to the middle of the file. Through the tiny speaker, tinny but unmistakable, came the voice of Marcus Sterling. If we cover that spread, certain associates of mine are going to be very, very unhappy. Then Jax's voice. It's $50 million, coach. For one game. Elias lowered the phone. The elevator chimed softly as it reached the lobby. The doors opened, revealing the same security guard, the same marble floor, the same world he had left moments ago. But everything had changed. He wasn't just an unemployed coach anymore. He was a man holding a grenade with the pin pulled out. He walked out into the night. The rain was still pouring, soaking him to the bone the moment he stepped past the awning. But Elias didn't feel the cold. He gripped the phone in his pocket so tightly his fingers ached. He got into his car, the engine roaring to life. He didn't turn on the radio. He didn't check his messages. He just drove, merging back onto the highway, disappearing into the sea of red taillights. The windshield wipers beat back and forth, like a metronome counting down the seconds. Sterling thought he had won. He thought he had cut the head off the snake. But he had forgotten one thing about Elias Thorne. Elias didn't care about money. He didn't care about fame. He cared about the game. And the game wasn't over. It was just halftime. The darkness of Elias Thorne's apartment was different that night. Usually, the silence of his bachelor pad in Lincoln Park was a comfort, a respite from the deafening roar of 60,000 fans and the chaotic symphony of whistles and crashing pads that defined his workday. But as he stepped through the door, soaking wet and shivering from something deeper than the cold Chicago rain, the silence felt heavy, oppressive, like the air inside a tomb. He didn't turn on the lights. He couldn't bear the thought of seeing his own life illuminated. The framed photos of championship teams on the walls, the game balls signed by players who, as of an hour ago, were being told he was a lunatic. He navigated by the ghostly blue ambient light of the street lamps filtering through the blinds, moving straight to his small home office. His hands, usually steady enough to draw up a complex play with seconds on the clock, were trembling so violently he could barely plug the charging cable into his phone. He sat in his leather chair, staring at the device as if it were a radioactive isotope. 18 minutes and 42 seconds. That file contained the death of the NFL's integrity. It was the smoking gun, the nuclear code, the end of the world. Elias booted up his laptop, the fan whirred to life, sounding like a jet engine in the quiet room. He connected the phone and dragged the file onto his desktop. He renamed it simply Playbook. MP3. Then paranoia, cold and sharp, prickled the back of his neck. If Sterling was willing to fix the Super Bowl for $50 million, what would he do to the man holding the evidence? He copied the file to 3 different encrypted cloud drives. Then he took an old USB stick from his desk drawer, transferred the file, and taped the stick to the underside of his bookshelf. Only then did he exhale. He didn't sleep. He sat by the window, watching the rain wash the city, drinking lukewarm tap water, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped at 6 a.m. It didn't come with a knock on the door, but with the buzzing of his phone. It wasn't a call. It was a news alert, then another, then a torrent of them, vibrating against the mahogany desk like a swarm of angry hornets. Breaking. Titans head coach Elias Thorne fired days before Super Bowl. ESPN. Sources cite cognitive decline and erratic behavior in Thorne's departure. TMZ. Exclusive cheerleaders allege harassment by veteran coach. Elias picked up the phone, his stomach churning. He opened the ESPN app. There, scrolling across the bottom of the screen, was the dismantling of his 30-year legacy. They weren't just firing him. They were erasing him. They were painting a portrait of a senile, drug-addled old man who had lost his grip on reality. He turned on the TV, needing to see the executioner's face. The morning show hosts looked grave, their voices lowered in that practiced tone of faux sympathy. On the screen was a split shot, a file photo of Elias shouting on the sidelines, chosen specifically to make him look unhinged, and a live feed from the Titans practice facility. Marcus Sterling stood at the podium, looking somber in a dark suit. Next to him was Jax Miller. "This is the hardest decision I have ever had to make," Sterling was saying, pausing to wipe a non-existent tear from the corner of his eye. Elias has been a father figure to this organization. But over the last few months, we have noticed disturbing changes, memory lapses, aggressive outbursts. We tried to get him help privately. But after an incident last night where he became violent with staff members, we had no choice but to prioritize the safety of our players. Elias threw his water glass at the wall. It shattered, shards of glass raining down onto the hardwood floor. "Liar!" He screamed at the screen, his voice raw. "You soulless son of a bitch." Then Jax stepped to the microphone. The boy looked shaken, humble. Perfect performance. "I love Coach Thorne," Jax said, his voice trembling. "He taught me everything. It breaks my heart to see him like this. He wasn't himself lately. He was calling plays that didn't exist. He was seeing things. We just want him to get the medical help he needs." Elias sank back into his chair, the fight draining out of him. It was a masterstroke. If Elias released the audio now, Sterling's lawyers would spin it instantly. Of course, the crazy old man has a tape. It's doctored. It's AI-generated. It's the paranoid delusion of a man suffering from dementia. They had vaccinated the public against the truth. For 2 days, Elias didn't leave the apartment. He watched as the narrative solidified. The Titans promoted the offensive coordinator to interim head coach. The team flew to the Super Bowl host city without him. The city of Chicago, initially shocked, began to turn. Sports talk radio was filled with callers sharing stories. They had heard about Elias drinking before games, about him popping pills on the sidelines. The lies spread like a virus, infecting the memory of every victory he had ever delivered. On the 3rd day, the food ran out. Elias put on a baseball cap, pulled his coat collar up, and ventured out to the corner bodega. The rain had stopped, replaced by a biting wind that whipped off Lake Michigan. He kept his head down, grabbing a carton of milk, a loaf of bread, and a newspaper. "That'll be $12.50, the clerk said. Elias looked up to hand over the cash. The clerk, a man Elias had bought coffee from for 5 years, paused. His eyes widened. He looked at Elias, then at the newspaper on the counter with Elias's face on the cover under the headline "Fall from Grace." The clerk didn't say hello. He didn't ask about the team. He just recoiled slightly, a look of pity and disgust on his face. Just take it," the clerk mumbled, waving his hand. "Just go." Elias left the money on the counter and walked out. The shame burned hotter than the wind. He wasn't a coach anymore. He was a pariah. A cautionare tale. He sat on a park bench, the cold seeping through his coat. He watched a group of kids throwing a football in the grass. They were wearing Titans jerseys. Jax Miller's number 12 was everywhere. He touched the phone in his pocket. The truth, he thought. I have the truth. But truth without a platform was just a whisper in a hurricane. He couldn't go to the police. Sterling owned half the precinct. He couldn't go to the press. They were already feasting on his carcass. He needed to go to the source. He needed the one place where Sterling couldn't edit the feed, the Super Bowl. But he was banned. His credentials were revoked. His face was on every security watch list in the league. He couldn't just walk in. He needed a ghost. Elias pulled out his phone. He scrolled past the hundreds of unread messages from reporters and fake friends, searching for a number he hadn't dialed in years. Ben statico male. Ben was the head audio engineer for Soldier Field before Sterling pushed him out for cost-cutting measures, which really meant Ben refused to use cheap equipment that compromised the fan experience. Ben was now a freelancer, a bitter genius who knew the wiring of every stadium in the country better than the architects who built them. Elias dialed. "Yeah." A gruff voice answered on the fourth ring. "Ben." "It's Elias." Silence. Long, heavy silence. "You got a lot of nerve calling me, Elias," Ben said, his voice low. "After what they're saying about you. I got grandkids. I don't need the drama." "It's all lies, Ben. All of it. That's what they all say. I can prove it," Elias said, the desperation creeping into his voice. "I have a recording. Sterling and Jax. Fixing the game. Rigging the spread." Another silence, this one different. Stunned. "You're drunk," Ben said. But he didn't hang up. "Meet me. O'Leary's on 35th. An hour. Please, Ben. For the game." The line clicked dead. Elias didn't know if that meant yes or no. An hour later, Elias was sitting in the back booth of O'Leary's, a dive bar that smelled of stale beer and floor polish. It was dark, empty save for a few day drinkers glued to the TV above the bar, which, inevitably, was showing highlights of the Titans' arrival at the Super Bowl. The door opened. Ben O'Malley walked in. He was a small man, balding, wearing a utility vest that seemed too big for him. He scanned the room nervously before spotting Elias. He didn't wave. He walked over and slid into the booth opposite Elias, keeping his coat on. "You look like hell, coach," Ben said. "I feel worse," Elias admitted. He placed his phone on the table, screen down. "Thanks for coming. I'm not staying. Unless you got something better than a conspiracy theory." Elias looked around. The bartender was wiping glasses. No one was close. He flipped the phone over, plugged in a pair of wired earbuds, and slid them across the table. "Put them on," Elias commanded. Ben hesitated, then sighed and put the buds in his ears. Elias pressed play. He watched Ben's face. For the first 10 seconds, Ben looked bored. Then his eyebrows knit together. His eyes widened. His jaw went slack. He looked up at Elias, his face draining of color, then looked back down at the table, listening intently. When the recording ended, Ben took the earbuds out slowly, as if they were hot coals. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," Ben whispered. "That's Sterling. That's really him. And Jax," Elias added. "They're throwing the game, Ben. Sunday. $50 million on the line." Ben ran a hand over his bald head. "This gets out. The league implodes. The lawsuits alone. I don't care about the league. I care about the fact that they destroyed my life to cover this up." Elias leaned in. "I need to play this, Ben. Not on a blog. Not on YouTube where they can delete it. I need to play it where they can't stop it." Ben stared at him, realization dawning. No way. You're talking about the Super Bowl? The halftime show?" "No." Elias shook his head. "The end of the game. The trophy presentation. When the whole world is watching. When the confetti is falling on that liar's head." "It's impossible," Ben hissed. "Security is tighter than the Pentagon. Biometrics, bomb sniffers, facial recognition. You're on the blacklist, Elias. If you get within a mile of that stadium, they'll tackle you." "That's why I need you," Elias said. "You're freelancing for the halftime audio crew, aren't you? I saw your name on the vendor list before I left." Ben looked away, guilty. "Yeah. I'm doing cable wrangling for the pyro team. Does grunt work?" "It gets you a pass," Elias said. "It gets you inside. And what? I sneak you in a gear case?" Ben scoffed. "You're 6'2", Elias." "No. I get in my own way. I just need you to get me access to the booth. The main PA feed. You know the override codes. You know the back doors. Elias, if we get caught, this isn't just jail. Sterling will have us killed in prison. You know that." Elias reached across the table and gripped Ben's wrist. "Look at me, Ben. Look at what they did. They took my name. They took my dignity. I have nothing left. If I don't do this, I'm dead anyway. I'm just a ghost haunting my own apartment." He paused, letting the ambient noise of the bar fill the space. "But you always hated the suits," Elias said softly. "You always said the game was about the noise, the roar, the truth of the crowd. Help me give them the truth, Ben. One last time." Ben looked at the scarred hands of the coach. He looked up at the TV, where Marcus Sterling was smiling, shaking hands with the commissioner. Ben's face hardened. A spark of anger, long dormant, ignited in his eyes. "The main control room is on the mezzanine level," Ben said quietly, his voice barely audible. "It's digital, mostly automated. But there's an analog override for emergency announcements. Weather alerts, evacuation orders." Elias's heart hammered against his ribs. "Does it override the broadcast feed?" "It overrides everything," Ben said. "Stadium speakers, VIP boxes, even the feed going to the TV trucks. If you patch into that, the whole world hears it." "How do I get there?" Ben reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a crumpled pack of cigarettes and a pen. He flipped a coaster over and started drawing. "There's a service elevator near the east loading dock. It's used for catering. It bypasses the main scanners, but there's a guard. Always. I can handle a guard," Elias said. "Not this kind. Private military contractors. Sterling hired them." Ben drew a square. "But the catering staff changes shift at the start of the fourth quarter. It's chaos. If you look the part, maybe I'll look the part." Ben stopped drawing. He looked up at Elias. "Once you push that fader up, there's no coming back. You're going to prison, Elias." Elias sat back, a grim smile touching his lips for the first time in days. "I'm already in prison, Ben. I'm just planning my escape." Ben finished the drawing and slid the coaster across the table. It was a map to the heart of the beast. "I can get you a uniform," Ben said. "Janitorial or catering. I leave for the host city tomorrow. I can stash it in a locker at the bus depot near the stadium. Locker 402. Code 1985. 1985, Elias repeated. The year the Bears won. Ben was sentimental. "Don't make me regret this, coach." "You won't." Ben stood up, downed the rest of Elias's beer, and walked out without looking back. Elias sat alone in the booth, staring at the coaster. The plan was insane. It was suicide. It was the only play he had left. He picked up the coaster and tucked it into his pocket, right next to the phone. He looked up at the TV screen one last time. Jax Miller was laughing at something a reporter said. "Laugh while you can, kid," Elias whispered to the empty room. "The game isn't over." He signaled the bartender for the check. He had work to do. He had to shave his beard, dye his hair, and learn how to walk like a man who didn't exist. He had 3 days to become a ghost. And on Sunday, the ghost was going to scream. The bathroom mirror of the Motel 6 off the I-55 was cracked, a jagged scar of silver running diagonally across Elias Thorne's reflection. The fluorescent light above hummed with a dying, insectoid buzz, casting a sickly yellow pallor over the small, cramped space that smelled of bleach and stale cigarette smoke. Elias gripped the edge of the porcelain sink, his knuckles white, staring at the stranger looking back at him. The transformation was complete, but the dissociation was just beginning. The thick, salt and pepper beard that had become his trademark, the beard the media loved to zoom in on when he was screaming at referees, was gone. In its place was a raw, pale jawline that he hadn't seen in 20 years. It made him look younger, yet somehow more vulnerable, like a tortoise stripped of its shell. His hair, usually a wild, wind-swept mane of gray, was now cropped close to the skull, military style, and dyed a dull, lifeless brown. The cheap dye had stained the skin behind his ears, a detail he scrubbed at furiously with a rough washcloth until the skin was red and raw. He wasn't Coach Thorne anymore. He wasn't the general of the gridiron. He was nobody. He was a ghost in a polyester uniform. Elias packed his bag with methodical precision. The phone, the bomb that would blow up the NFL, was powered down, wrapped in a plastic sandwich bag, and taped to the inside of his left thigh. He couldn't risk a pocket search. He put on the heavy work boots he had bought at a thrift store, lacing them tight. Every movement was heavy, laden with the knowledge that this was a one-way trip. He checked the room one last time, wiping down the sink, checking the drawers, leaving no trace that Elias Thorne had ever been there. He left the room key on the nightstand next to a $10 bill for the maid, grabbed his duffel bag, and stepped out into the humid, pre-dawn air of New Orleans. The host city was already awake, or perhaps it had never gone to sleep. Even at 5 a.m., the humidity clung to Elias like a wet wool blanket. The air tasted of swamp water, exhaust fumes, and the lingering sweet-sour scent of spilled alcohol from Bourbon Street. The Super Bowl wasn't just a game here. It was an occupation. Every billboard, every bus stop, every storefront was plastered with the Super Bowl 59 logo and the faces of the stars. He saw Jax Miller's face on a 20-foot banner hanging from a parking garage, his smile perfect and airbrushed, eyes looking toward a future that Elias intended to cancel. Elias pulled his nondescript baseball cap lower and walked. He avoided the main boulevards where the police presence was heavy. Instead, he stuck to the side streets, moving with the rhythmic, invisible gait of the working class. The delivery drivers, the sanitation workers, the people who made the city run while the tourists slept. He kept his head down, shoulders slumped forward, erasing the confident, upright posture of a leader. The Greyhound bus depot was a concrete island of misery on the edge of the downtown district. It was a place of transience and exhaust, a purgatory for people trying to get somewhere else. Elias entered the terminal, the automatic doors sliding open with a hiss. The air inside was cooler but smelled of industrial cleaner and desperation. He scanned the rows of lockers, his heart rate picking up a dangerous rhythm. Locker 402. He found it in the back corner, near the restrooms. The metal was dented, covered in scratches and graffiti tags. Elias looked around. A janitor was mopping the floor 50 feet away, listening to headphones. A couple slept on a bench using their backpacks as pillows. No one was watching. Elias keyed in the code. 1-9-8-5. The lock clicked. The sound was as loud as a gunshot in Elias's ears. He pulled the door open. Inside, sitting alone in the dark metal cube, was a gray canvas backpack. Ben had come through. Elias grabbed the bag and moved quickly to the men's restroom. He locked himself in the handicap stall, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. He unzipped the bag. Inside was a treasure trove of deception. There was a uniform, a generic, gray jumpsuit with a patch that read, Sodexo Catering Services, on the chest. There was a clipboard with a manifest of food deliveries. And at the bottom, in a plastic sleeve, was the lanyard. Elias held it up to the dim light. It was a masterpiece, a laminated ID card with a photo of a man who looked remarkably like Elias's new persona. The name on the card read Carl Jenkins. The holographic foil of the NFL security clearance shimmered in the light. It was a Zone 4 pass, service and logistics. It wouldn't get him into the locker rooms or the VIP boxes, but it would get him into the bowels of the stadium. It would get him in the door. He changed quickly, stuffing his street clothes into the duffel bag and shoving it deep into the trash can, covering it with used paper towels. He put the lanyard around his neck, tucking it inside the jumpsuit. He looked in the mirror one last time. Carl Jenkins looked back. Tired, invisible, a cog in the machine. "Showtime, Carl," Elias whispered. The walk to the stadium was a journey through a militarized zone. The closer he got to the Superdome, the thicker the security became. The streets were blocked off by concrete jersey barriers and black SUVs. SWAT teams with automatic rifles stood on corners. Drones buzzed overhead like angry hornets, their cameras scanning the throngs of fans who were already gathering for the tailgate parties. The atmosphere was electric, a frenetic energy that usually made Elias's blood sing. The smell of charcoal grills, the thumping bass of hip-hop and country music clashing from rival sound systems, the sea of jerseys. It was the church of football. But today, Elias felt like an atheist walking into a cathedral. He saw a group of Titans fans, grown men with their faces painted blue, high-fiving each other. If you knew, Elias thought, if you knew what they were doing to your game, you'd burn this place down. He navigated toward the East Gate, the designated entrance for logistics and staff. It was less of a gate and more of a fortress checkpoint. A line of delivery trucks idled, waiting for bomb-sniffing dogs to circle them. A separate pedestrian lane was filled with hundreds of workers. Ushers, vendors, cooks, cleaners, shuffling forward toward the white security tents. Elias joined the line. He kept his eyes on the ground, adopting the bored, 1,000-yard stare of a man who was just here to earn a paycheck. His heart, however, was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Thump, 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 thump. He focused on his breathing. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. The tactical breathing he taught his quarterbacks to use in the pocket. Next, a voice barked. The line moved. Elias shuffled forward. He was 10 feet away. Bag check. 5 feet. ID out. Elias stepped up to the podium. A private military contractor, a man with a neck thick as a tree trunk and Oakley sunglasses, stood there. He didn't smile. He didn't look Elias in the eye. He just held out a gloved hand. Elias handed over the lanyard. The guard took it, looked at the photo, then looked at Elias's face. Time seemed to stretch. The sounds of the crowd faded into a dull roar. Elias felt a bead of sweat trickle down his spine. Does he recognize the eyes? Elias wondered. They say the eyes never change. Hat off, the guard grunted. Elias froze for a microsecond. He slowly reached up and removed the baseball cap. He stood exposed, the bad haircut and the dye job gleaming in the sunlight. He forced himself to look bored, maybe a little annoyed. The guard scanned his face, his gaze lingering on the hairline. Elias stopped breathing. He knows. He's going to tackle me. Turn around, the the guard ordered. Elias turned. He felt the guard's hand patting down his back, his sides, his legs. The guard's hand brushed the inside of his thigh, inches from the taped phone. Elias clenched his jaw, willing his muscles not to spasm. "All right?" the guard said, spinning him back around. He swiped the ID card across a scanner. Beep. A red light flashed. Elias's stomach dropped through the floor. The guard frowned, tapping the machine. "Hold on," the guard muttered. He swiped it again. Beep. Red again. "Problem?" Elias asked, his voice gravelly and low. He was proud of how steady it sounded, even as his world teetered on the edge of the abyss. "Reader's been glitching all morning due to the humidity," the guard grumbled. He looked at the card again, bending it slightly to check the lamination. He looked at the line of impatient workers building up behind Elias. "Hey, Jenkins, you holding up the line or what?" someone shouted from behind. The guard sighed, annoyed by the hassle. He punched a code into the keypad manually. Chirp. Green light. Go. The guard shoved the ID back at him. "Keep it visible at all times." Elias grabbed the lanyard, shoved his hat back on, and walked through the metal detector. He grabbed his clipboard from the X-ray belt. He didn't run. He didn't look back. He walked at a steady, trudging pace until he was past the secondary perimeter and into the cool, concrete shadow of the stadium tunnel. Only then did he exhale, a long, shuddering breath that almost buckled his knees. He was in. The interior of the Superdome was a labyrinth. It was a city within a city, a network of endless concrete corridors, fluorescent lights, and the overwhelming smell of popcorn, stale beer, and industrial sanitizer. The noise here was different, a low, vibrating thrum, like the engine of a massive ship. Golf carts zipped by carrying executives in suits. Forklifts beeped, carrying pallets of beer kegs. Elias knew stadiums. He knew the anatomy of these beasts. He knew that the glamorous TV shots only showed the skin. This was the guts. He checked his watch. 2 p.m. Kickoff was in 3.5 hours. He needed to get to the mezzanine level, but his Zone 4 pass only cleared him for the ground-level loading docks and kitchens. The elevators to the upper levels would have their own checkpoints, guarded by more attentive security details. He needed a route that didn't exist on the official maps. He walked deeper into the tunnel, clutching his clipboard like a shield. He passed the Titan's locker room. The door was closed, guarded by 2 state troopers. He paused for a fraction of a second, staring at the logo on the door. He could imagine what was happening inside. The taping of ankles, the smell of wintergreen and adrenaline, the lies being spoken by the interim coach. Focus, he chided himself. That room is the past. He found a service stairwell marked emergency exit/maintenance access only. It had a keypad lock. Elias pulled out the map Ben had drawn on the coaster. Code 1985. He punched it in. The light blinked green. "Ben, you beautiful, paranoid genius." Elias slipped into the stairwell. It was quiet here, the roar of the stadium muffled by thick concrete. He began to climb. 1 flight, 2 flights. His legs burned. He wasn't as young as he used to be, and the stress was taking a physical toll. He climbed past the club level, past the luxury suites. He reached the landing for the press box and control room level. He cracked the door open a sliver to peek into the hallway. This was the danger zone. The carpet here was plush. The lighting was softer. This was where the VIPs, the league officials, and the network executives roamed. And, crucially, where the private security would be sharper. Elias saw a catering cart unattended near a service elevator. A plan formed. He slipped out of the stairwell, moving quickly to the cart. He grabbed a silver platter cover and tucked his clipboard under his arm. He hunched his shoulders, looking at the floor, pushing the cart forward. He passed a group of network producers arguing about camera angles. They didn't even see him. To them, he was furniture. He was part of the background service that made their luxury possible. He made it to the alcove near the main audio control room. He abandoned the cart and slipped into a janitorial closet just as a security patrol turned the corner. He stood in the dark closet, surrounded by mops and buckets, listening to the heavy footsteps pass by. He checked his phone. 5 p.m. The game was about to start. From his hiding spot, he could hear the muffled boom of the pre-game pyrotechnics. The floor beneath him vibrated. The national anthem began. A soaring, soulful rendition that usually made Elias stand tall with his hand over his heart. Today, huddled in the dark, it sounded like a funeral dirge. He cracked the door of the closet. The hallway was empty. The patrol had moved on. He stepped out and moved toward the heavy, soundproof door marked main audio/PA control. This was it, the final hurdle. But as he reached for the handle, the door opened from the inside. Elias froze. A young technician, maybe 25, wearing a headset around his neck, stepped out, holding a half-eaten sandwich. He stopped dead, staring at Elias. "Whoa," the kid said, startled. "Can I help you? This is a restricted area." Elias looked at the kid. He looked at the ID badge around the kid's neck.
Intern.
Delivery. Elias grunted, improvising. "Supervisor said you guys ordered coffee? Big urns?" The kid frowned. "We didn't order coffee, and catering usually calls first." "Look, man," Elias said, channeling every ounce of grumpy, overworked blue-collar energy he could muster. "I got a manifest here, says, audio booth, I got a cart down the hall with 10 gallons of dark roast. You want it or not? Because I got to get to the commissioner's suite in 5 minutes." The kid hesitated. The sheer mundane authority in Elias's voice threw him off. He looked down the hall toward the abandoned cart. Hold on, let me ask the director," the kid said, turning back to the door. "Forget it," Elias snapped, feigning annoyance. "I'm taking it to the lighting crew. They actually tip." He turned to walk away. "Wait," the kid said. "If it's free coffee, sure, bring it in." The kid held the door open. Elias turned back, suppressing a smile that would have been terrifying. "You got it, boss. Let me just grab the cups." He walked past the kid, into the doorway. The control room was like the bridge of a starship. Banks of monitors covered every wall, showing 100 different angles of the field. The sound of the crowd was piped in here through high-fidelity speakers, a constant, roaring ocean. 3 other engineers sat at the massive mixing console, their backs to the door, focused intently on the sliders and screens. Elias stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind him. The sound of the lock engaging was the sweetest thing he had ever heard. "Where's the coffee?" the kid asked, looking around Elias. Elias dropped the act. He stood up to his full height, his posture shifting from the slumped catering guy back to the imposing, iron-spined stature of an NFL head coach. He reached into his jumpsuit and pulled out the phone. "Sit down, son," Elias said, his voice dropping to the command tone that had silenced locker rooms for 3 decades. The kid's eyes widened. He recognized the tone, if not the face. Who are you?" The other engineers turned around. One of them, a bearded man with a headset, stood up angrily. "Hey, you can't be in here. Security." Elias moved fast. He didn't run, he advanced. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and slammed his hand down on the master mute button on the console, cutting the ambient crowd noise in the room. Silence fell instantly. "My name is Elias Thorne," he said, ripping the fake ID from his neck and tossing it onto the mixing board. "And nobody is leaving this room until the game is over." The engineers stared at him. The bearded man looked at the ID, then up at Elias's face, piercing through the dye job and the lack of beard. Recognition dawned, followed by horror. "Thorne?" the man whispered. "You're supposed to be. They said you were crazy." "Maybe I am," Elias said, his eyes scanning the complex array of inputs and outputs, searching for the master override that Ben had described. "Crazy enough to break into the Super Bowl." He looked up at the main monitor wall. The game had just kicked off. The ball was in the air, soaring through the stadium lights. On the field, the Chicago Titans were lining up. Elias watched the screen. He saw Jax Miller trot onto the field, adjusting his helmet. The crowd roared. The The graphic on the screen flashed. Super Bowl 59. "Don't touch that phone," Elias warned the bearded engineer who was reaching for a landline. "I have a dead man's switch. You call security, I upload a file to the internet that burns this whole league to the ground. You want to be the guy who let that happen on his watch." The engineer froze, hand hovering over the phone. "Good," Elias said. He pulled a chair over and sat down directly behind the main console, facing the engineers like a captain addressing his crew. He placed his phone on the desk, the screen glowing. "Now," Elias said, his eyes fixed on the monitors where his former team was playing a game that had already been decided in a penthouse 3 days ago. "We're going to watch some football, and when the clock hits 0, we're going to make history." On the screen, Hijacks Miller took the snap. He dropped back. He looked right, then left. Then he threw a pass into the flat that was just a little too low, forcing the receiver to stumble. An incompletion. To the world, it was just a nervous start. To Elias, it was the first line of the script. "He's starting early," Elias murmured to himself, a cold fury rising in his chest. "Okay, Marcus, you play your game. I'll play mine." The engineers watched him, terrified and confused. Outside, 60,000 people cheered. Inside the soundproof glass box, the countdown had begun. The silence inside the audio control booth was a physical weight, heavier and more suffocating than the humidity outside. While the rest of the world was vibrating with the kinetic energy of the Super Bowl, the 4 men inside this glass aquarium were frozen in a tableau of terror. Elias Thorne sat in the ergonomic mesh chair usually reserved for the director, his posture rigid, his eyes darting between the bank of high-definition monitors and the 3 engineers huddled near the server racks. He held his phone like a detonator. It wasn't connected to anything yet, not physically, but the threat he had woven around it was enough to keep the room paralyzed. "Hands where I can see them," Elias said. His voice wasn't loud, but it had the gravelly, non-negotiable timbre that had once commanded respect from 300-pound linemen. "And don't look at me. Look at the screens. Watch the game." The lead engineer, a man named Davis whose beard was flecked with gray, stared at the monitors with wide, unblinking eyes. He was sweating, a dark stain spreading across the underarms of his polo shirt. "You're making a mistake, coach," Davis whispered, his voice trembling. "They have snipers. If they breach this door, the file uploads." Elias lied smoothly. "And if I walk out of here in cuffs, the file uploads. The only way the world doesn't hear what's on this phone is if I decide not to play it. So sit tight." On the massive central screen, the game was unfolding. The Chicago Titans were driving down the field against the Miami Sharks. It looked impressive. The crowd was roaring, a sea of noise that registered on the booth's VU meters as jagged red spikes, even with the monitors muted. But to Elias, it was like watching a clumsy magic trick where he could see the wires. "Watch this," Elias murmured, pointing at the screen. It was 2nd and 5. Hijacks Miller was in the shotgun. He's gonna look off the safety, pump fake left, and then take a sack. A 3-yard loss. He has a clean pocket, the young intern, the one who had let Elias in, squeaked from the corner. "The line is holding. Watch," Elias repeated. On screen, Hijacks took the snap. The pocket held. He had time. He had a receiver open on the slant route, a play Elias had designed specifically for this zone coverage. But Hijacks didn't throw. He pumped once, hesitated, tapped the ball against his thigh, a subtle tell of indecision that Elias knew was fake, and then crumpled as the Miami defensive end broke through. The sack. A 4-yard loss. The room went silent. Davis turned his head slowly to look at Elias. "Lucky guess," Davis muttered, though his eyes betrayed his doubt. "Luck has nothing to do with it," Elias said, his gaze fixed on Hijacks' face as the camera zoomed in. The kid looked frustrated, slamming his hand on the turf. It was Academy Award-worthy acting. "It's math. Sterling needs the spread under 3 points. He can't risk a blowout. A touchdown there puts them up by 10 early. Too much momentum. They have to stall the drive." The game ground on a slow, ugly war of attrition. To the casual fan, it was a defensive struggle, a gritty gridiron chess match. To Elias, it was a butchery. He sat there, a ghost in the machine, calling out the sins before they were committed. Midway through the second quarter, the door handle rattled. Everyone in the room flinched except Elias. "Open up. Security check." A muffled voice came through the heavy soundproofing. Davis looked at Elias, panic flaring in his eyes. He made a move to stand up.
"Seat," Elias hissed.
He grabbed the landline phone on the console, hit the button for the external intercom, and held the receiver out to Davis. "Tell them everything is fine. Tell them you're dealing with a sync issue on the halftime feed and you can't be disturbed. Do it or I hit send." Davis took the phone, his hand shaking so hard the cord danced. He licked his dry lips. He pressed the talk button. "Yeah, we're good in here," Davis stammered. "We got a sync drift on the pyro trigger. I need the room sealed until halftime or the show's gonna be out of whack." "Copy that." The guard's voice crackled back, sounding bored. "Don't take too long. Perimeter check coming through in 20. The footsteps receded. Davis hung up the phone and slumped back in his chair, exhaling a breath he felt he had been holding for an hour. He looked at Elias with a mixture of fear and newfound resentment. "I just lied to federal security for you. I'm an accessory now." "You're a patriot, Davis," Elias said dryly. "You're helping clean up the game." "I don't care about the game," Davis snapped, his fear giving way to anger. "I care about my pension. I care about going home to my wife. You think because you got screwed, the whole world has to burn? You're just a bitter old man." Elias looked at him. For a moment, the mask of the hardened general slipped, revealing the profound sadness beneath. "I am a bitter old man," Elias admitted softly. "But I'm not the villain here. Look at the screen, Davis. Really look at it." On the monitor, the Titans were in the red zone. 3rd and goal from the 2-yard line. "That's your team, isn't it?" Elias asked. "You grew up watching them?" "Since I was 6, Davis grunted. "Then watch your quarterback." Hijacks was under center. He took the snap. He rolled right. The play was a bootleg designed to give him an easy run into the corner of the end zone. There was no defender within 5 yards of him. It was a walk-in touchdown. But as Hijacks neared the pylon, he stumbled. His feet seemed to tangle in the turf. The ball popped loose, a fumble, tumbled out of bounds. The crowd groaned. The referees signaled. Fumble out of the end zone. Touchback. Miami ball. "No," Davis whispered. He leaned closer to the monitor. He tripped. "Turf monster," Elias scoffed. "On a field that was resodded yesterday? Look at his left foot, Davis." He dragged the toe. He tripped himself. Davis watched the replay. The slow-motion camera was unforgiving. Jax's left cleat clearly, deliberately, hooked behind his right calf. It wasn't a stumble. It was a sabotage. "Why?" Davis asked, his voice hollow. "Why would he do that?" "Because a touchdown there covers the spread," Elias said. "Sterling has 50 million riding on the Sharks, keeping it close. Hijacks just bought him an island." The atmosphere in the booth shifted. The fear was still there, but it was being crowded out by a sickly realization. These engineers were technicians, experts in signal flow and fidelity. They spent their lives ensuring that what the audience saw and heard was perfect. To realize that the source signal, the game itself, was corrupted was an affront to their professional existence. The halftime show came and went. A blur of neon lights and pop stars that Elias ignored completely. He used the break to check the connections. He found the auxiliary input on the main console, a 3.5mm jack usually used for testing audio levels from an iPod. He pulled a cable from a drawer. He plugged one end into the console, the other into his phone. "Don't do it, Thorne," the intern pleaded softly. "Once you broadcast that, there's no going back. You'll go to jail for the rest of your life. Federal wiretapping laws, hacking." "I know," Elias said. He looked at the kid. "What's your name, son?" "Kevin." "Kevin, when this is over, tell the cops you tried to stop me. Tell them I threatened to kill you. Be the hero. Don't let my anchor drag you down. Kevin stared at him, confused by the sudden kindness in the eyes of the man who had hijacked their lives. The second half began. The game remained agonizingly close. 17-14, Titans leading. But Miami was driving. The fourth quarter arrived. The tension in the stadium was palpable, a vibrating frequency that shook the glass of the booth. But inside, Elias was cold. He was waiting for the final act. With 2 minutes left on the clock, the Titans had the ball. They were up by 3. All they had to do was run the clock out. First down, run. Second down, run. Miami had no timeouts left. He's going to throw it, Elias said. That's suicide, Davis argued, now fully engaged in the analysis. Run the ball, kneel it out. Game over. Sterling doesn't want the game over yet, Elias said. He needs Miami to score one more time. He needs a push. A tie game going into overtime or a Miami win. A 3-point Titans win is too dangerous for the betting books. On the field, Jax Miller broke the huddle. He didn't line up in the victory formation. He lined up in the shotgun. What is he doing? Davis yelled at the screen. Kneel the damn ball. Jax took the snap. He dropped back. He threw a pass deep down the middle into double coverage. The Miami safety intercepted it easily. He ran it back to the Titans' 40-yard line. The stadium erupted in boos. The announcers were screaming about inexplicable play calling and rookie mistakes. Elias didn't say a word. He just looked at Davis. Davis's face was red with rage. He wasn't scared of Elias anymore. He was furious at the betrayal unfolding on the field. That son of a bitch, Davis hissed. He threw it right to him. Now you see, Elias said quietly. Miami took over. For plays later, they kicked a field goal. Tie game. There were 30 seconds left on the clock. The Titans got the ball back. They're going to kneel now, Elias predicted. They'll take it to overtime. More time for point shaving. More time to manipulate the outcome. But as the Titans lined up for the kickoff return, something happened that wasn't in the script. The Titans' return man, a rookie named Sparks who wasn't part of the inner circle, a kid Elias had drafted for his raw speed, caught the ball 5 yards deep in the end zone. He was supposed to take a knee. He didn't. Sparks saw a lane. He burst out of the end zone. He cut right, dodging a tackle. He hit the sideline. Go. Kevin shouted involuntarily. Sparks was flying. He's going to score, Davis whispered. He's going to ruin the fix. Elias stood up. He watched Jax Miller on the sidelines. The camera caught Jax's reaction. He wasn't cheering. He looked terrified. He was screaming at his teammates to get a penalty, waving his arms. Sparks crossed the goal line. Touchdown. 24-17 Titans. No time left. The stadium exploded. It was mayhem. Fireworks launched. The Titans bench emptied, except for Jax Miller and the corrupt coaches, who looked like they had just witnessed a murder. Sterling's plan had failed. The rookie hadn't gotten the memo. The Titans had won by 7. The spread was covered. The associates had lost their millions. It's over, Kevin said, breathless. We won. No, Elias said, his voice hard as iron. The game is over. The reckoning begins now. He looked at the celebration on the screen. He saw the confetti cannons blasting. He saw the stage being wheeled out for the trophy presentation. The commissioner was walking out with Marcus Sterling. Sterling was forcing a smile, but his eyes were dead. He was already calculating how to explain this to the mob. Elias turned to the mixing board. Davis, Elias said. Davis looked at him. I need the master override. I need the PA system, and I need the broadcast feed. I want every TV in America to hear this. Davis hesitated. He looked at the door. He could run. He could hit the alarm now. The game was done. Then he looked at the screen, at Jax Miller shaking his head in disgust while his teammates celebrated the greatest moment of their lives. He looked at the fake smile on Sterling's face. Davis reached out. His hand hovered over a bank of red switches protected by plastic covers. Code red sequence. Davis said, his voice steady. It overrides the network audio. It's meant for national emergency alerts. He flipped the plastic covers up. Click, click, click. He looked at Elias. You sure you want to die on this hill, coach? I died 3 months ago, Elias said. I'm just waiting to be buried. Davis nodded. He pressed the 3 red buttons simultaneously. On the console, a light turned from green to flashing crimson. The audio meters for the stadium feed dropped to 0, waiting for input. Input A is live, Davis said. You have the world's ear. Elias picked up his phone. He unlocked the screen. The file playbook. MP3 was queued up. He looked at the screen one last time. Marcus Sterling was accepting the Lombardi Trophy. A reporter was shoving a microphone in his face. Marcus Sterling. The reporter's voice played on the monitor, but muted in the room. An incredible victory. How does it feel? Elias thumbed the volume wheel on the console to maximum. He pressed play on his phone. The first second was static, a harsh digital hiss that tore through the stadium speakers, silencing the music, silencing the announcers, silencing the cheers. 60,000 people looked up, confused. Millions at home tapped their TV remotes, thinking the audio had cut out. Then the voice of God or the devil boomed from the heavens. The simple math, Elias. The Vegas odds are too heavy on us. If we win by more than 10 points, a lot of powerful friends lose a lot of money. Elias watched the screen. He saw Sterling freeze mid-sentence. He saw the color drain from the owner's face, leaving him looking like a wax figure melting under the lights. You want me to rig the championship? Elias's own voice echoed, sounding weary and righteous. I want you to be smart. Fumble here, a missed pass there. Inside the booth, Kevin was crying silently. Davis was staring at the floor, arms crossed. Elias didn't look away. He watched the destruction of the lie. He watched the players on the field stop celebrating, looking around in confusion. He saw Jax Miller try to run toward the tunnel, only to be blocked by a wall of confused cameramen. It's $50 million, coach. I can buy a lot of integrity with that. That was the kill shot. The crowd's confusion turned to a low, rumbling growl, and then to a roar of betrayal that shook the very foundations of the stadium. Elias took his hand off the console. The recording continued to play, looping the damnation of the Chicago Titans. They're coming, Davis said, nodding toward the door. Heavy boots were thundering down the hallway. Swat. Elias sat back in the director's chair. He unbuttoned the top of his gray jumpsuit. He felt strangely light, as if gravity had finally released its hold on him. Let them come, Elias said. He closed his eyes and listened to the chaos he had unleashed. It wasn't the sound of football. It was the sound of justice, and it was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. The door exploded inward. The door to the control booth didn't just open. It disintegrated, exploding inward in a shower of splintered wood and twisted metal as the battering ram hit the lock. Elias Thorne didn't flinch. He didn't turn around. He sat in the director's chair, his eyes fixed on the bank of monitors, watching the chaos unfolding on the field below. The audio of his own voice, the recording of the damnation of the Chicago Titans, was still looping through the stadium speakers, a ghostly echo bouncing off the concrete walls of the Superdome. But inside the booth, the sound was drowned out by the screams of the tactical team. Federal agents. Hands. Show me your hands. Get down. On the ground. Now. The room swarmed with black-clad figures, their movements sharp and violent. The red laser sights of automatic rifles swept across the mixing console, dancing over Elias's chest like nervous fireflies. Davis, the lead engineer, was already on the floor, hands laced behind his head, sobbing into the carpet. Kevin, the intern, was curled in a fetal position under the desk. Elias moved slowly, with the deliberate gravity of a man who had already accepted his fate. He raised his hands, palms open, and interlaced his fingers behind his head. He didn't look at the soldiers, he looked at the screen. He saw Marcus Sterling on the Jumbotron, surrounded by confused security, his mouth moving in a silent scream of denial. Target secured, a voice barked. Strong hands grabbed Elias by the shoulders, wrenching him out of the chair. He was slammed face first onto the cold, hard surface of the mixing desk, the sliders digging into his cheek. The pain was sharp, but distant. He felt the cold steel of handcuffs ratcheting tight around his wrists, biting into the skin. Elias Thorne, you are under arrest for violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, federal wiretapping, and incitement to riot. An agent recited, the words mechanical and rehearsed. I didn't incite a riot, Elias mumbled, his face pressed against the console. I just turned on the lights. Shut up. The agent hauled him to his feet. They marched him out. The hallway, which had been empty and silent just an hour ago, was now a corridor of flashing strobe lights and shouting voices. Elias was flanked by 4 agents, moving in a tight phalanx. As they passed the open doors of the luxury suites, Elias caught glimpses of the faces inside. The network executives, the sponsors, the VIPs. They weren't drinking champagne anymore. They were staring at him with a mixture of horror and awe, phones raised, recording the man who had just nuked the NFL. The journey down to the holding cells was a descent into hell. The bowels of the stadium were vibrating. The crowd above wasn't cheering. They were roaring with a guttural, primal anger. It sounded like a beast waking up. The floorboards shook with the stomping of 60,000 pairs of feet. They shoved him into a temporary holding cell, a cinderblock room usually reserved for unruly drunks or ticket scalpers. It smelled of industrial disinfectant and stale urine. They sat him on a metal bench and chained his handcuffs to a ring in the wall. Then they left him. For an hour, Elias sat in silence. The adrenaline that had fueled his infiltration began to crash, leaving him shivering and exhausted. His shoulder ached where they had grabbed him. His wrists burned, but his mind was clear, crystal clear. He closed his eyes and replayed the look on Jax Miller's face. The moment the boy realized that $50 million couldn't buy back his soul. The door buzzed and swung open. A woman walked in. She was sharp, angular, dressed in a dark pantsuit that looked out of place in the grime of the stadium dungeon. She carried a tablet and 2 cups of coffee. She kicked the door shut with her heel. Black, she said, setting 1 cup down on the metal table bolted to the floor. I assumed you weren't a cream and sugar kind of guy. Elias looked at the coffee, the steam rising in the cold air. He didn't move toward it. Who are you? My lawyer? I'm Special Agent Elena Vance, FBI. Organized Crime Division, she said, pulling out a metal chair and sitting opposite him. She didn't look angry. She looked tired, and perhaps a little impressed. And no, I'm not your lawyer. Your lawyer is currently fighting through a media scrum outside that rivals the paparazzi at a royal wedding. You're the most famous man in America right now, Mr. Thorne. Infamous, Elias corrected. That depends on who you ask. Vance tapped her tablet screen. The internet is calling you a hero. The league is calling you a terrorist. The DA is calling you a headache. And what do you call me? Vance took a sip of her coffee, studying him over the rim of the cup. Her eyes were intelligent, assessing. I call you the man who just handed me the biggest racketeering case since Enron on a silver platter. But you also broke about 12 federal laws to do it. I had to, Elias said, his voice raspy. They owned the narrative. They owned the police. This was the only way. We can debate the ethics of vigilantism later, Vance said, setting the cup down. Right now, we need to talk about the recording. Is there more? More? That clip was 90 seconds. Sterling talks about powerful friends. He talks about associates. I need the full tape, Elias. I need names. I need the network. Elias leaned back against the cold wall. The chain rattled. It's on a USB drive, taped under the bookshelf in my apartment in Chicago. And it's on 3 cloud servers, encrypted. The keys are set to auto-release to the New York Times in 24 hours if I don't input a code. Vance nodded, making a note on her tablet. Smart. You played this like a field general. I was a field general, Elias said softly, until they stripped my rank. Vance swiped on her tablet and turned it around to face him. You might want to see this. Live feed from the helipad on the roof of the stadium. Elias leaned forward, squinting at the screen. The footage was grainy, shot from a news helicopter hovering above the chaos. It showed the roof of the Superdome. A sleek, black helicopter, Sterling's private transport, was spooling up its rotors, preparing for takeoff. But the launch was blocked. 2 FBI helicopters were hovering dangerously close, effectively boxing it in. On the tarmac, armed agents were swarming the aircraft. The door of the black helicopter opened. Marcus Sterling stepped out, his hands raised. The wind whipped his expensive suit jacket around him. He looked small, defeated. He was forced to his knees by an agent. "We picked him up 10 minutes ago," Vance said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Attempting to flee to a non-extradition country. That, combined with your audio, is enough to hold him without bail. He's done, Elias. The Titan Empire is over." Elias watched the screen as Sterling was handcuffed. He felt a strange lack of satisfaction. He expected triumph, but all he felt was a heavy, weary finality. "And Jax?" Elias asked. Vance swiped the screen again. The image changed to the locker room hallway. Jax Miller was sitting on the floor, still in full uniform, his helmet rolling on the ground next to him. He was weeping, his head in his hands. A group of his own teammates stood around him, not comforting him but blocking him from leaving. They looked disgusted. A massive defensive tackle, a guy Elias knew well, was pointing a finger in Jax's face, shouting something the camera couldn't pick up. "Protective custody," Vance said. "For his own safety. The fans. They aren't taking it well. There are riots in Chicago. Someone threw a brick through the window of Jax's car dealership. We had to evacuate his family." Elias flinched. "I didn't want that. The family had nothing to do with it." "You lit a fire in a dry forest, Elias," Vance said sharply. "You don't get to control where the wind blows the flames. People are angry. They feel betrayed. They spent their paychecks on tickets, on jerseys, on a lie. You gave them the truth, and the truth hurts." She pulled the tablet back. "Now let's talk about you. The U.S. attorney is furious. You hijacked a national broadcast. You compromised the emergency alert system. Technically, that's domestic terrorism." "I know the playbook," Elias said. "I'll do the time." "You will," Vance agreed. "But, given the circumstances and given the cooperation you're about to give me regarding Sterling's gambling ring, I think we can work something out. You're not going to maximum security, but you're never working in football again." Elias laughed, a dry, cracking sound. "Agent Vance, I stopped working in football the moment I walked into that control room. I'm not a coach anymore. I'm just a fan who wanted a fair game." Vance stood up. She signaled to the guard outside the door. "We're moving you. Federal holding facility downtown. There's going to be a circus out there. Keep your head down, keep your mouth shut." She paused at the door, looking back at him. "For what it's worth, I was rooting for the Titans." "So was I," Elias whispered. "So was I." The transport van was an armored beast, windowless and heavy. Elias sat in the back, shackled to the floor, swaying with the motion of the vehicle as it navigated the crowds. Even through the armor plating, he could hear the noise outside. It was a cacophony of sirens, chanting, and breaking glass. The Super Bowl, the greatest show on earth, had turned into a crime scene. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but his mind was racing. He thought about the legacy he had destroyed. The records, the trophies, the history of the franchise, all tainted now. He had saved the integrity of the sport by burning down its cathedral. Was it worth it? The question gnawed at him. He thought of the kid in the park, the one wearing Jax's jersey. That kid was probably crying right now, tearing the poster off his bedroom wall. Elias had broken that kid's heart. But then he remembered the conversation in the penthouse. The simple math. $50 million. He had broken a heart to save a soul. He had to believe that. The van came to a halt. The doors opened, revealing a secure underground garage at the FBI field office. Flashbulbs popped in the distance, behind the perimeter fence, like a lightning storm. Elias was processed with efficient bureaucracy. Fingerprints, mugshot, strip search. The orange jumpsuit they gave him was scratchy and smelled of detergent. It was a far cry from the tailored suits he wore on the sidelines, or even the catering uniform he had worn to sneak in. They put him in a cell with a single window that looked out at a brick wall. Night fell. Elias lay on the cot, staring at the ceiling. Sometime around midnight, a guard walked by. He was an older man, heavyset, with a thick New Orleans accent. He stopped at Elias's cell. "Hey!" the guard grunted. Elias sat up slowly. "Yeah?" The guard looked around to make sure no one was watching. Then, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small transistor radio. He slid it through the food slot. "Thought you might want to hear," the guard mumbled. "Hear what?" "The news. It's all they're talking about." Elias took the radio. He held it to his ear. Unprecedented scenes here in New Orleans. The news anchor's voice crackled through the static. "Commissioner Goodell has just announced an immediate, indefinite suspension of the Chicago Titans franchise operations. The Super Bowl result is officially vacated. No winner will be declared for the 2025 season." Elias closed his eyes. An asterisk. The season ended with an asterisk. Meanwhile, sources close to the investigation say that Marcus Sterling's assets have been frozen. The Department of Justice is looking into ties between Sterling and several offshore syndicates. This goes deeper than one game, folks. This looks like the unraveling of a decade-long scheme. The anchor paused, and then his voice softened. "And regarding Elias Thorne, the debate is raging across the country tonight. Is he a criminal, or is he the savior of the sport? We have a caller on the line from Chicago. Mike, you're on the air." "Yeah, hi." A voice crackled, thick with emotion. "I just want to say, I've been a season ticket holder for 40 years. My dad took me, I took my son. When Thorne got fired, I believed the lies. I burned his bobblehead in my backyard. I feel sick about that now. Tonight hurts. It hurts like hell, but at least it's clean pain. You know? It's not the rot. Thorne cut out the cancer. If he's listening, thanks, coach. You didn't let them play us for fools." Elias lowered the radio. A single tear tracked through the grime on his cheek. He wasn't a hero. He knew that. Heroes don't end up in federal prison. Heroes get parades. He was a janitor. He had cleaned up the mess, and now he had to live in the trash heap he had created. But listening to Mike from Chicago, Elias felt the knot in his chest loosen. Just a fraction. The guard came back an hour later. "Need the radio back, Thorne. Shift change." Elias handed it over. "Thank you. Don't mention it," the guard said. He hesitated, then tapped the bars. "My boy plays high school ball. Quarterback. He watched the game. He asked me why Jax Miller did it. I told him some men are weak. And then he asked me why you did it." "What did you tell him?" Elias asked. "I told him some men just love the game too much to let it die." The guard walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Elias lay back down. The cell was cold, but for the first time in months he felt warm. He slept. The next morning, the legal machinery ground into gear. His court-appointed lawyer, a harried young man named Cohen who looked terrified to be near a case of this magnitude, arrived with a plea deal. "It's aggressive, Mr. Thorne," Cohen said, shuffling papers on the small table. "The prosecution wants a deterrent. They're offering 5 years. 3 for the hacking, 2 for the inciting panic. Concurrent sentences might get you out in 3 with good behavior." "Take it," Elias said immediately. Cohen blinked. "Don't you want to fight it? We could argue whistleblower status. We could argue duress. Public opinion is on your side." "I don't want a circus, Cohen," Elias said firmly. "I want it over. I did the crime. I'll do the time. Just make sure the deal includes full immunity for Ben O'Malley and the engineers in the booth. They were hostages. They did nothing wrong." Cohen scribbled furiously. "I can try, but 5 years? At your age? I've spent 30 years on the sidelines, Cohen. I know how to wait out the clock." 2 days later, Elias stood before a federal judge. The courtroom was packed. Sketch's artists were working furiously. The prosecution read the charges. Elias pleaded guilty. He didn't look at the cameras. He looked at the back of the room. Sitting there in the very last row was Ben O'Malley. Ben gave him a small, sad nod. Elias nodded back. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said, peering over her glasses, "do you have anything to say before sentencing?" Elias stood up. He adjusted his orange jumpsuit as if it were a suit and tie. He looked at the judge, then at the prosecutors, and finally directly into the camera lens that was broadcasting to the world. "Football," Elias began, his voice steady, "is a game of inches, but honor is a game of absolutes. You either have it or you don't. I lost my career. I lost my reputation. But I didn't lose the game. The scoreboard at the Super Bowl is dark. But the record is clear. We won. Not the Titans, but the truth. And I'd do it again." The gavel banged. Scene transition. 6 months later. The prison yard of the Federal Correctional Institution in Terre Haute, Indiana. It was a low-security facility, more like a heavily guarded camp than a dungeon. Elias was sweeping the basketball court. The rhythm was soothing. Swish, swish, swish. The autumn leaves were falling, drifting over the concrete. He stopped to wipe sweat from his brow. He looked older. The prison food and the lack of stress had made him thinner, gaunter. But his eyes were clear. "Hey, coach!" Elias turned. A group of inmates were gathered by the weight bench. They were a mix of white-collar criminals and low-level drug dealers. "We need a fourth for touch football," one of them yelled. Jenkins pulled a hamstring. Elias leaned on his broom. "I'm retired, boys." "Come on, coach," another yelled. "Just QB for us. Neither of these bums can throw a spiral." Elias looked at the broom. Then he looked at the beat-up leather football the inmate was spinning in his hand. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across the yard. The air smelled of dry leaves and cooling asphalt. It was football weather. Elias set the broom against the fence. "All right," he called out, walking toward them. "But we're running the West Coast offense. And if I see anyone loafing on their routes, they're doing laps." The inmates cheered. Elias Thorne took the ball. He gripped the laces, felt familiar, felt right. He wasn't in the Super Bowl. He wasn't on TV. He was a convict in a gray sweatsuit. But as he dropped back to pass, looking downfield at a receiver breaking open near the fence, Elias Thorne smiled. He was still in the game. The iron gates of the Federal Correctional Institution in Terre Haute didn't screech when they opened. They hummed with a well-oiled, indifferent efficiency. It was a sound Elias Thorne had heard thousands of times over the last 36 months, the mechanical heartbeat of his confinement. But this morning, the hum signaled something different. It signaled the end of the timeout. Elias stepped out into the crushing brightness of an Indiana morning. He blinked, shielding his eyes with a hand that felt lighter without the phantom weight of a whistle or a clipboard. He was 58 years old, but his shadow stretched long and thin across the gravel, looking like that of a much older man. He wore a gray suit that had been fashionable 3 years ago but now hung loosely on his frame, the fabric smelling faintly of mothballs and the state-issued storage locker. There was no media circus this time. No flashing bulbs, no microphones thrust in his face, no screaming fans. The world, in its infinite capacity for distraction, had moved on. The Super Bowl scandal was now a documentary on a streaming service, a chapter in sports history books, a trivia question at bar nights. The rage had burned out, replaced by the next scandal, the next season, the next hero. A single yellow taxi idled by the curb. The driver, a young man with headphones around his neck, didn't look up as Elias tossed his duffel bag into the back seat. "Where to?" the driver asked, eyeing Elias in the rearview mirror. There was no recognition in his eyes. To him, Elias was just another ex-con finishing a stretch. "The bus station," Elias said. His voice was raspy from disuse. He hadn't spoken much in the last year. He had learned that in prison, silence was the only true currency. As the taxi pulled away, Elias didn't look back at the prison walls. He looked at the cornfields rushing by, the endless rows of green stalks swaying in the wind. They reminded him of the defensive lines he used to drill, uniform, disciplined, endless. He rolled down the window, letting the air hit his face. It tasted of dust and fertilizer and freedom. He wasn't going back to Chicago. Chicago was a graveyard of memories, a city where every street corner held a ghost of the man he used to be. He wasn't going to New York or Los Angeles. He was going to a place where the lights were dimmer, where the stakes were lower, and where the game was still just a game. He bought a ticket to a town called Oak Haven, Pennsylvania. It was a dot on the map, a former steel town clinging to the Rust Belt, nestled in a valley where the fog rolled in heavy at night. He had scouted a linebacker from there 20 years ago, a kid who played with a raw, desperate hunger. Elias remembered the town for its silence and its grit. It seemed like a good place to disappear. 6 months later, the residents of Oak Haven knew him only as Eli. He lived in a small, one-bedroom apartment above a bakery on Main Street. The rent was cheap, and the smell of rising dough in the pre-dawn hours was a comfort he hadn't expected. He found work not as a coach, but as a groundskeeper for the Oak Haven High School district. It was a cruel irony, perhaps, or a self-imposed penance. The man who had commanded the grandest stages in professional sports was now pushing a lawnmower across a patchy, uneven field used by teenagers. But Elias treated that field with the reverence of a cathedral. He arrived every morning at 5 a.m., before the sun crested the ridge. He walked the gridiron, checking for divots, removing stones, inspecting the drainage. He mowed the grass in perfect, alternating stripes, measuring the height of the blades to the millimeter. He painted the yard lines with a steady hand, the white chalk gleaming against the green. He never spoke to the players. He never spoke to the coaching staff, a group of well-meaning but tactically inept volunteers who shouted cliches from the sidelines. Elias was a phantom in a green jumpsuit and a wide-brimmed hat. He did his work, he watched from the distance, and then he vanished into the tool shed. But he watched. God, how he watched. He saw the quarterback, a lanky kid named Sarah, who had a cannon for an arm but stared down her receivers too long. He saw the linebacker, a boy named Travis, who was afraid of contact. He saw the plays crumble before they even started. He felt the phantom twitch in his muscles, the urge to blow a whistle, to grab a face mask, to scream, "No! Watch the hips! Read the guard!" But he stayed silent. He was banned. The Thorne rule, the league called it, a lifetime ban from any organized coaching position at any level. He was radioactive. If the school board knew who was cutting their grass, he'd be fired before the engine on his John Deere cooled down. So he channeled his coaching into the turf. If he couldn't teach them how to run, he would give them a surface worthy of running on. He made that field fast. He made it safe. It became the best surface in the county, a lush carpet that felt like a miracle in the middle of a dying town. One crisp October afternoon, as the leaves were turning the color of bruised plums, Elias was in the shed, cleaning the spark plugs of the line painter. The Oak Haven Lions were practicing outside. It was a miserable session. They were 0-8 on the season, a team demoralized and broken. Elias wiped grease from his hands with a rag. He heard the thud of a ball hitting the goalpost, followed by shouting. "It's impossible. The angle is wrong." Elias peered through the dusty window. It was the kicker, a sophomore named Leo. He was trying to hit a 40-yard field goal from the hash mark. He missed every time, hooking it left. The head coach, a math teacher named Mr. Henderson, was yelling at him. "Just kick it straight, son. Stop overthinking it." Elias sighed. He turned back to his work. "Not my circus," he told himself. "Not my monkeys." But the sound of the ball hitting the upright clank was driving him insane. It was a sound of failure. Elias put down the wrench. He pulled his hat low. He walked out of the shed. He didn't walk to the coach. He walked to the ball bag sitting on the sideline. He picked up a football. The leather felt cool and pebbled in his hands. A jolt of electricity, familiar and agonizing, shot up his arm. He walked out onto the field. The practice stopped. The players stared. Mr. Henderson looked confused. "Hey, Eli," Henderson called out. "We're in the middle of drills." You need to wait to sprinkle the field. Elias ignored him. He walked up to Leo, the kicker. The boy looked terrified. Give me your shoe, Elias said. His voice was low, rough like gravel. What? Leo stammered. Your kicking shoe. Give it to me. Leo looked at the coach, then back at the crazy groundskeeper. Slowly, he unlaced his cleat and handed it over. Elias inspected it. He ran his thumb along the instep. Just as I thought, he muttered. The cleat pattern is wrong. You've got a mud stud right on your plant pivot. It's catching the turf. You're not hooking the ball. You're twisting your ankle before you even make contact. He pulled a pair of pliers from his jumpsuit pocket. With a sharp twist, he ripped the offending stud out of the sole. He tossed the shoe back to the boy. Put it on, Elias commanded. Plant your foot 6 inches wider. Lean your shoulder into the wind. Follow through. Leo blinked. He put the shoe on. He placed the ball. He stepped back. The entire team watched. The silence was heavy. Leo ran up. He planted his foot. He swung. Thwump. The sound was different. Deep. Resonant. The ball soared into the gray sky, rotating perfectly end over end. It split the uprights dead center with 10 yards to spare. The players cheered. Leo looked at his foot like it was a magic wand. Mr. Henderson walked over, eyeing Elias suspiciously. How did you know that? Elias picked up his bucket of chalk. He looked at the coach, and for a second, the disguise slipped. The eyes of the general flashed beneath the brim of the hat.
Geometry, Elias Lied.
Just geometry. He turned and walked back to the shed, feeling the eyes of the team burning into his back. He knew he had crossed a line. He knew he should be worried. But as he closed the shed door, his hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the fix. A week later, on a Tuesday evening, a black sedan pulled into the gravel lot of the high school. It wasn't a luxury car, it was a mid-range rental, dusty from the road. Elias was locking up the shed. He froze when he heard the car door close. He knew that sound. He turned slowly. Standing by the car, leaning against the hood with a cane, was a man in his late 20s. He walked with a slight limp. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, looking like any other blue-collar worker in Oak Haven. But the face, the jawline, the haunted eyes was unmistakable. Jax Miller. Elias didn't move. He stood by the chain-link fence, the keys to the shed digging into his palm. Jax walked toward him. The limp was bad. A legacy of the game, or perhaps a legacy of what came after. "Hello, coach," Jax said. His voice was softer than Elias remembered, stripped of the arrogance that had once defined it. "Jax," Elias nodded. "You're a long way from Chicago." "I don't live in Chicago anymore," Jax said. "I live in Cleveland now. I sell insurance." "Insurance?" Elias repeated. "That's sensible. Pays the bills. And nobody asks for an autograph." Jax stopped a few feet away. He looked out at the field, at the pristine grass glowing under the twilight. "Nice field. Better than Soldier Field ever was." "I take care of it," Elias said defensively. "I know you do." Jax turned to look at him. "I read about you in the alumni newsletter. Someone mentioned a groundskeeper named Eli who fixed a kicker's swing. I knew it had to be you. Are you here to turn me in?" Elias asked. "Violation of the ban?" Jax laughed, a short, dry sound. "No, the league doesn't care about us anymore, coach. Sterling died in prison last month. Heart attack. Did you hear?" "I heard," Elias said. He felt nothing. Sterling was a ghost long before he died. "I didn't come to turn you in," Jax said. He shifted his weight on the cane. "I came to say thank you." Elias frowned. "Thank me? I destroyed your career, Jax. I took $50 million out of your pocket. I made you a pariah." "You did," Jax admitted. He looked down at his shoes. "I hated you for a long time. The first year. I wanted to kill you. I lost everything. My house, my wife, my friends. I was waiting tables in a dive bar, and people would spit in my food if they recognized me." He looked up and his eyes were wet. But then, I started sleeping again, Jack said quietly. Before the leak, when I was taking Sterling's money, couldn't sleep. I was throwing up every morning. I felt like I was rotting from the inside out. I was rich, but I was dead. Jack stepped closer. You took the money away. You took the fame away. But you gave me back my name. When I look in the mirror now, I don't see a cheat. I see a guy who made a mistake, paid for it, and is trying to live straight. You saved my soul, coach. Even if you had to break my legs to do it. Elias felt a lump form in his throat, hard and painful. He had spent years wondering if he was the villain of Jax's story.
I'm sorry, Jax, Elias whispered.
I'm sorry it had to be that way. Don't be, Jax said. He reached into the back seat of his car and pulled out a football. It was an old, scuffed Wilson. I kept this. It's the ball from the touchdown pass I threw in the NFC Championship. The one we won fair and square. He held it out to Elias. I can't throw it anymore, Jack said, tapping his bad leg. Knee replacement gone wrong. But I thought, maybe you could use it. For the kids. Elias looked at the ball. He looked at Jax. He reached out and took it. His hands trembled. You're a good man, Jax Miller, Elias said. I'm trying to be, Jax smiled. A real smile this time. Take care of the field, coach. It's holy ground. Jax got back in his car. He didn't wave. He just drove away, the taillights fading into the Pennsylvania mist. Elias stood there for a long time, holding the ball. The weight of it felt like forgiveness. Epilogue. The Friday night lights. 3 years later. It was the state championship game. The Oak Haven Lions had made a miracle run. From 0 to 8 to undefeated. The stadium was packed. The whole town was there. The air smelled of hot chocolate, popcorn, and autumn chill. The band was playing. The cheerleaders were screaming. And the lights, those glorious humming floodlights, turned the night into day. Elias Thorne was not on the sideline. He was not in the press box. He was sitting in the very last row of the bleachers, up in the shadows where the light barely reached. He wore his green groundskeeper jumpsuit and a wool hat. Down on the field, the Lions were down by 4 points. 6 seconds left on the clock. Ball on the 5-yard line. Mr. Henderson, who had become a decent coach over the years thanks to anonymous notes, left in his locker every Tuesday morning, called a timeout. Elias watched the huddle. He knew the play they were calling. Red right 88, spider 2Y banana. A fake handoff, a rollout, a pass to the tight end in the corner. He leaned forward, his hands gripping the cold metal of the bench. Don't force it, he whispered. Read the end. If he crashes, dump it. The teams lined up. The crowd held its breath. The silence was absolute. The snap. The quarterback, a senior named Leo, the same kid Elias had helped with the kick years ago, who had converted to QB, took the ball. He faked the handoff. The defense bit. Leo rolled right. The defensive end crashed. Leo didn't panic. He planted his foot the way Elias had taught him. He didn't throw the hard pass. He floated it. A soft, perfect spiral that arched over the defender's fingertips. The tight end caught it in the back of the end zone. Touchdown. The stadium exploded. The roar was deafening. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. People were hugging, crying, storming the field. Elias sat still in the midst of the chaos. He closed his eyes and let the sound wash over him. It wasn't the sound of $50 million. It wasn't the sound of a gambling spread. It was the sound of effort, of heart, of a game played clean. He opened his eyes. He saw the players hoisting the trophy. He saw Leo pointing up at the sky. Elias stood up. He picked up his broom. His work was done. The field had held. The game was safe. He turned and began the long walk down the back of the bleachers, away from the celebration. As he reached the gate, a young boy, maybe 7 years old, was running past him, trailing an oversized jersey. The boy stopped and looked up at the old man in the green jumpsuit. "Hey, mister!" The boy yelled over the noise. "Did you see that? We won." Elias stopped. He looked down at the boy, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I saw it, son. Elias said softly. I'm gonna be a quarterback one day, the boy said, puffed with pride. Just like Leo. Elias reached into his deep pocket and pulled out a scuffed, old leather football. The one Hijacks had given him. He spun it in his hands one last time. Here, Elias said, handing the ball to the boy. Take this. The boy's eyes went wide. He grabbed the ball with both hands. Wow, thanks. Is this a special ball? Elias looked back at the field, where the lights were shining on the weeping, cheering, living mass of humanity. Yeah? Elias Thorne smiled, and for the first time in forever, the smile reached his eyes. It's the only kind that matters. It's an honest one. He patted the boy on the head, walked through the gate, and disappeared into the darkness, leaving the lights behind him.